on as I investigate what the future holds for all of us and how we can be ready for what's coming. I'm thrilled to have with us Prathima Manohar, a social entrepreneur and founder of the Urban Vision, a think tank on cities. She's been a contributing columnist on architecture, urban development, and design for several publications. She's also an architect, a critic, a writer, and a TV journalist. As an urbanist, she has worked on pilot projects and researched issues such as affordable housing, participatory planning in green cities. She is an architect, holds a bachelor's degree in architecture, and was awarded Stanford University's prestigious Draper Hills Fellowship on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. Also been a fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Prathima regularly attends conferences and is a voice, an Indian voice on the global stage at many global platforms. And more importantly, from a personal perspective, Prathima is a very dear friend, someone who I know is a all-weather, all seasons, and 24/7 friend, most dependable and reliable. Prathima Manohar, thank you for being in my life and thank you for doing this interview.
Hi, Vibha. So nice to see you. And I'm so excited about your book. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Well, thank you, Prathima, for all your help with the book. And, I'm super excited to have this conversation because I know you come from a very pristine educational background. You've really spent the early years of your life skilling in terms of just getting your foundation right. And then you took that foundation to a really global platform and you do a lot of on-hand, on-ground work. So I think I'm going to have lots of snippets from you coming in from all the varied experiences that you've made sure you've had to enrich yourself and now enrich those around you. So to get started with this conversation, when we pick this topic, future of work, we were thinking like, is this a good topic? Is this interesting? Is this relevant to the world we live in today? So from where you sit, from your lens and vantage point, why talk about the future of work? Why is this even an important conversation to have?
In today's economic environment, when there's so much of disruption all around us, right? Economic, social, environmental, one of the key aspects of our life that is disrupted is work. I think in the last 3-4 years, all of us have personally seen how the nature of our work has changed. And as as you sit around and see how all the disruptive forces in the world right now, this is a space that is rapidly changing, and obviously it probably has the most significant impact on people, right? It's their right to livelihood. It's their right to life. Work is crucial to have a good life for various different segments of the society. So it's an important topic to think about as we try to craft a more inclusive, happy world, right? And obviously there are forces of market, there are forces of nature, but I think the reason it's so important to have this conversation is because the kind of policies that we develop and envision can actually, direct future of work to become better for everyone. By everyone, I mean everyone, because I mean the farmers in our villages, and I mean the blue-collar workers on our construction sites in our cities.
Okay, terrific. So you're saying the future of work is synonymous with the future of life. And when we think of life in the future, you're thinking more from an inclusive lens, and hence policy making with a futuristic perspective can influence work and hence influence lives. Okay, great. Beautifully explained, beautifully described, great context to the conversation. Now, as you think back on all these factors you talked about, life, work, blue collar, the bankers on Wall Street, and then the AI developers in the Valley, and then the farmers in India. What's influencing all our lives and hence our work and hence our future? What are some of the factors at play today?
Before I go to that, I just want to make a point about this, this future of life in general, right? Is that when I get reminded about this, constitution that was created by the king of Bhutan, where he said, he wanted to ensure the right to happiness for all of his citizens, right? And when you think about it that way, when your vision is to ensure that all the citizens in your country, in your cities are happy, you're obviously thinking about work that gives you fulfillment and contentment. You're looking at an environment that keeps you healthy and all of that, right? So I think for me, the context of future of work is one where, everybody has access to livelihood, to excel and progress and, be able to do what they really enjoy and what brings them joy. But also, as economists or policymakers in urbanism, um, it's our role to ensure that we take everyone with us,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
And what are the factors that are affecting future of work at this point in time? There are numerous. I don't think there are so many different forces colliding together as much as they are today, right? Um, you can say from technological disruptions like AI and robotics, where there's going to be huge amount of automation, which means that a lot of jobs that we are seeing today may not exist in the future. So, we need to think about how do we bring those workers back into the workforce, or how do we create livelihood for them? Does that mean, universal basic income? Or do we create new skills for this population for a newer industry? And I think there's going to be a lot of conversations around that with you, because people tend to over focus on automation and AI and how it's probably going to take a quarter of the current jobs away very, very quickly. And we're already seeing that, right? If you saw, lots of freelancers in India who are on Upwork, who have clients in New York or London writing content for them, those jobs don't exist anymore because suddenly ChatGPT makes it easier to kind of create that content for SEO or web optimization, right? So I think that those kind of jobs, automation of manufacturing, construction, content industry is going to take away a lot of jobs. So we have to kind of we have to think about what do we do with those kind of workforce, and how do you kind of skill them for the future. The topic that I'm following closely, that I think will disrupt the future of jobs, is climate change and sustainability. I think climate change is probably the biggest disruptor that we will see in this century. It has huge consequences on everything, from healthcare to economy. And I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples of how that could change the future of jobs. So, recently, not recently, it's been almost a decade, and I think probably 8 to 10 years, the central banks of Europe said that they will mandate climate risk to be part of lending. So basically, any lending that the banks in Europe would do have to kind of think about climate risk. So imagine how that affected entire industries, right? Like, so for example, if you were in real estate, or if you're doing large scale architecture, the KPIs around climate change and resilience had to be part of it. We had to ensure that.
Have we mandated it though?
Yeah, the central banks of Europe have
They
mandated it.
Oh.
It's a law now. And at some point, the US was part of that as well, but now I think they're withdrawn. And this is a proactive policy, right? Because Europe is very forward thinking about greening their economy. So which means that they're saying, a lot of the cars which were solely dependent on fossil fuels had to kind of move to cleaner forms of energy. So you saw a whole industry change because of that. And you're seeing even in if there's funding in built environment and real estate, there's a whole change in the way you have to do things. So you have new skills needed desperately. I want to talk about Bangalore, which is my home city, we've been in the news for something terrible over the last couple of months, which is that we have no water. And there have been shocking stories of all these high-rise residents of high-rise buildings in some of these neighborhoods having to go to a mall to take a shower because there's no water, and the whole city is now dependent on the tankers for just just getting by their day, right? And this is again climate change,
Mm.
right? And there are solutions to fixing some of this, and there have been people who've been talking about it for a long, long time. And we've not the technical solutions exist, right? It's just that we don't have the political ingenuity and will to almost implement it.
Mm.
So one of my favorite story of the jobs of the future is um, so one of the big solutions for fixing the water crisis is groundwater recharge and rainwater harvesting. And we get so much rain in this, in our country, in our cities, and you can actually capture the rains to ensure that we don't land into this kind of situation. Other than, I mean, there are various other factors. I don't want to simplify the solution to fixing the water crisis in India, and in Bangalore in particular. But one of the ways to fix it is through groundwater recharge and rainwater harvesting. So, in Bangalore, over the last many years, there were these groups of old ancient well diggers of India. They were called Manuvadars, right? So historically they built the big, wells of India, and today they are being repurposed to create groundwater water recharge pits and rainwater harvesting systems within our city. So this is a great example of a future skill that we need to fix climate change. But it's a really ancient skill. These Manuvadars used to build our wells centuries ago. So I think climate change is going to bring up new types of industries, new types of skills that are needed to fix it. Somehow in places like India, we go to the edge, it's a disaster, and then we say, okay, what do we do about it? Like the things that are happening in Bangalore right now. I mean, there is a community of people who've been talking about it for years. But now that it has come to such a terrible situation that it is on all the international and national media, and it's a day-to-day reality for the residents, we
That's
have
my
to come
great.
up with solutions. But
Okay.
you can do it proactively. We know that these are challenges that the world faces, and solutions are there. Some of it are vernacular solutions, and you have to reskill them for the future.
Okay, great. So you open the context by saying, look, lots of changes happening.
Yes.
You identify two primary changes, right? The technology revolution with AI coming in, and then the climate revolution. So let's first talk about the technology revolution. And you mentioned universal basic income. Sam Altman has gone on public record saying there will be no jobs in the future. We're all going to live on this world with UBI, and governments are going to be distributing this wealth. How realistic, in your view, is this whole UBI phenomenon? Are you really going to see people living off of similar income levels? Are you really seeing governments mandate this sort of UBI and then people just sitting back and like living their lives? Is this a realistic scenario? And what are some of the challenges with this whole concept of UBI from where you see it?
I agree with him that a lot of the current jobs will be redundant in the future, and we are already seeing that. The future is here. We are seeing a lot of the jobs that we had in the last 2, 3 decades non-existent in the future. I don't think the whole economy is going to be based on those jobs, though. So newer jobs will get created, but we are in a very disruptive time. And I just want to go back, and this is a very serious issue when large parts of the population is not equipped for the new economy and the new disruptions that are coming, right? So policymakers have to start thinking about how do we, create other opportunities of work for this population, or how do they make their living? I think universal basic income. What do we mean by that, right? Like, creating, it's the day-to-day life of people is one thing, but also just giving them access to education and healthcare as well, right? That is already happening in certain advanced economies. So I am not fully convinced that all the jobs are going to be threatened because of AI and automation. But yes, a lot of the menial tasks, which are repetitive, could easily be, and which are unsafe, for example, manual scavenging being redundant is a great thing. It's unsafe, and it's not the kind of jobs that we want people to have. So robots going and doing manual scavenging, for example, is a great thing, right? Those kind of automations are good. There are unsafe environments, for example, which we don't want humans to be in. So this is progress. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But I think what it does mean is that the policymakers and politicians of today have a huge task at hand, because they are going to see a scale of disruption that is unprecedented by history. So, how are you going to deal with large,
More
segments of
inequality.
the workforce
Yeah.
not without
Yeah.
jobs? So I guess we have to rethink the social contract. We have to rethink, how do you create opportunities for this group of people? So I don't think there's easy answers to this. For me, like just when in 2020, March, when we suddenly went into lockdown, right? Do you remember that month and year? I was so shocked to see the blue collar workers of Indian cities
Migrate.
actually walk thousands of miles away
Yeah.
to their villages, and these are invisible part of our city, right?
Yeah.
They're building our infrastructure, they're building our buildings, and I don't think even the government knew that there were so many of them, and they're living temporarily in the houses, in the little kind of
Construction site.
camps, in the
Yeah.
construction sites. And I think COVID actually laid bare the kind of disruptions in our economy, right? How fractured and unequal our cities and societies are. So it's time to reimagine the social contract. What do governments do? I'm not I love the markets. I am a capitalist, but capitalism has failed in many places. So we have to reimagine capitalism. It's the worst system, but it's the best system that we know, right? Like it may not be working in many places, but other systems have not worked.
But from what you are explaining, if we go into this sort of new world order where
Yeah,
you have a large chunk of the population basically unskilled, and then you have
for the
then
future. Yeah,
for the future, then you're saying that the government responsibility is to give them basic healthcare, sanitation, education. Then
yes,
you have this income load on the government where they say, hey, now we need this sort of revenue coming in to support this large chunk of population. And then you have,
yeah,
UBI, just, government doling out
yeah,
tops, etc. And then the wealthy people in the capitalist structure, then there's more pressure on them. They say, okay, we're going to increase taxes because where's the government going to fund this sort of healthcare and education benefit? So you're going to see, I feel it almost sounds like a dual world where on one end, capitalism will be
yeah.
encouraged, but then half the same
I think
government.
it's, so Vibha, in the last 3-4 years during the pandemic. I mean, we've been out of the pandemic now for the last 1 year or so, but if you looked at the economic data, and I saw some of the economists say that the billionaire wealth in
Mm.
those 3 pandemic years tripled,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that took 3 decades to happen before that,
Hmm.
right? While we've had the biggest job losses as well
Correct.
at the same time.
Mm.
Um, So, I mean, we need to rethink. I think this is not about government and private sector. And, all of us want a healthy, happy society. So
Mm.
all of us have to rethink how do you skill this population for the future? How do you ensure that everybody has access to a good quality of life. Like one of my favorite thinkers, like urbanists once said that quality of life distribution is more important than income distribution, right? And it's very hard to implement that in policy. But what that means is that whoever you are, you could be a billionaire, you could be a farmer, you could be a construction worker, but you have access to good education, basic good education, good healthcare, access to a great city where you can have leisure and parks and public spaces, which is accessible to everyone. Obviously, in the system that we have currently, and we've experimented with this over history, income, everybody having the same income is not possible. But everybody should have access to the most basic,
Okay.
A quality of life,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
They should not be malnutrition in a world which is, I don't know what's the size of the global economy right now.
Okay.
They
Okay.
should not be, a child should not have access to healthcare or good quality air, right? So I
That's
think
very
we have to reimagine the social contracts that the government has with its people. And I don't think this is anti-private sector. I mean, if a business can't do well in a community that is breaking down or in distress. So I think private sector entrepreneurs, the markets have to recognize that we want the society to thrive with us, right? It can't be one or the other, right?
Okay. Okay, that's very beautifully explained. It's obviously, it seems like, it's like a Venn diagram, both very strongly intersected, and codependence, interdependence of one over the other. Okay, and since you touched upon this, and I want to now start moving to your expertise in the as an urbanist. What is, if you just define for us, what is a smart city, and what are some of the components of how do you make a city smart?
Okay, my definition of smart city is a little bit different from what the world talks about smart city. Actually, the whole, smart city is something that came about in the last 2 decades or so, and very much focused on the technological side of urbanism, right? But I mean, so let me just say that cities are at the heart of some of the biggest challenges that we face as a world today, right? From climate change to poverty, to, social disruptions. But I also think that cities are actually at the heart of the solutions to fixing some of these problems, right? So, for example, cities can actually reduce your ecological footprint like by 10x if designed in the right way. So, your climate footprint or ecological footprint could be 10x lower depending on the kind of city that you lived in. And your health could be much better, right? So the type of city that you live in directly affects.
Can you explain how? Can you share how can how can you design a city that reduces my carbon footprint? That sounds amazing. How?
Um, So if you were, as a citizen, if you were to kind of just look at your ecological footprints and what are the things that make your ecological footprint, right?
Okay.
There's a very cute diagram on this, and I'm going to ask everybody to kind of Google that. What makes up my ecological footprint? And like a large percentage of it, for most people, is made up of one, how you move around, mobility in the city. Second is where you're living, how are you cooling or heating your buildings, what kind of materials which are in your houses. Your energy footprint is basically how you live in your homes every day, right? Energy sources in your building, the water sources, the food systems, how far or close is your food that is delivered on your table in the house, right? But almost 80% of it comes from built environment and mobility, right? So if you were a resident of Barcelona, where you're walking to everywhere, you are taking maybe the metro or bike or bus to work, to drop off your kid, your ecological footprint is suddenly 50% lower than a citizen in Atlanta who has to, or,
So
I don't know, like suburban India,
substituting
right?
cars with walking tracks or bicycling, that's one
Yeah,
way.
mass transit versus personal transit,
Okay, fine.
right?
Okay.
Um,
What is the
second
food
is
supply chain?
second,
Can you explain the food supply chain angle a bit?
how far your food is coming to you from.
Okay,
Like,
what?
I mean, for example, there are so many parts of the world which are not growing their own food, right? In India, we are very sustainable with the food supply chains because you're probably delivering your food. How the food is moving is also important. Where is it grown? Like, I don't know, if you're getting avocado from, I don't know, South America to come to Bombay, it's not very
Um,
sustainable.
okay, okay.
Your buildings as well, right? Like the way you design it. Like I always say that historically, Indian architecture, like original architecture, if you go to your villages and you see your homes, now obviously it's hard to duplicate that in the city, but our historical kind of architectural culture was that we really paid attention to wind, sun, rains, and all of that, right? So we designed our homes so we would not get the harsh afternoon sun into our rooms. We designed our homes in such a way that we could take, the wind into our, like there's a wind breeze blowing through our houses.
Yeah,
We had materials which kept us cool in the summer,
sure.
warm in the winter, right? Um, and I think there's a lot to learn from our traditional architecture
Mhm.
and maybe adapt it to the 21st century city, which has to be high density. Like today, we are doing like all the things that are terrible for energy in our cities, right? Like it doesn't make sense to use so much of glass uh, in our architecture because it requires so much more energy to cool the
Mm,
buildings.
mm.
Right? So architecture can also reduce your ecological footprint just by reducing the need for air conditioning or heating in the building, right?
Okay.
And the kind of materials that you use, if you use local materials,
Mm.
um, the ecological footprint is lower because you're not bringing it from somewhere else. But of course, some of this has to be pragmatic because you can't build a 30-story building with mud architecture, for example.
Sure, sure.
Right? But
Okay.
there are ways to fix that as well. So imagine if you lived in a city
Mm.
where where you had, where you could walk to work, you could drop your child off by walking down the street or take a bicycle to go to office or metro to go to office like you would in Manhattan, your ecological footprint is much lower and you're actually much more happier. And the thing is, there's so many health correlations to this,
Mm.
right? The air quality in some of our cities is so terrible, like Bombay, not so, last few years it's been really bad, but Delhi, a child that is growing up in Delhi has 50% lower lung capacity. And a
Mm.
child that is growing up in another city which has access to good quality air. This is linked to climate as well,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Because the more cars on the road, more pollution, and then obviously there are other factors of pollution as well. But a city that is ecologically sustainable also is a healthier city because the air quality is better. And American Heart Association, I think, recently said that if you have a walkable city, you are living in a walkable city, you are 50% lower, have 50% lower ability to get diabetes, for example. So now,
Okay. All these
if you're
correlations.
walking, yeah, there are health correlations as well.
Okay, okay.
Trees should be considered like a public health infrastructure,
Mm.
right? Because it makes you more happier. It really improves the urban air quality and it reduces the heat island effect. Um, so a lot of this is not rocket science, right? Like, so all of us in the urban planning policy community know what some of these policy urban planning ideas mean versus the other. It's not some smart technology, AI, and all of that.
Yeah.
It's
It's not,
these.
it's not
It's
smart tech. And there's not that much
it's
smart
smart.
tech going on,
Yeah.
huh?
So like smart tech, how do you like you have automate? What does that mean for an urban
Yeah.
like thing, right? Like so let's assume you have a smart trash receptacle.
Okay.
right? You
So
could
it
have
can sort of do the
which
discerning
can
between.
do the sifting and all of that. But what if you don't have smart citizenry, which puts the trash in that smart receptacle?
So to just put
Right.
it in that
Of
thing.
course, I mean, I love technology, but technology is just, it's a tool.
Hmm.
I feel like we're, Marshall Gans, the great public policy professor from Howard Kennedy School, once said that we are getting confused with the carpenter and the tools that the carpenter uses,
Hmm.
right? So this,
That's very true.
like, it's literally like, instead of focusing on the furniture that is being created and the carpenter, we are focusing on the like the hammer and the nails. And I think
But
it's
Prathama,
great.
everything you explained, this sounds like school, right? What we learned in school. Seems like my 10th standard syllabus. Everything you've explained, use less air conditioning, walk to school. Yeah, it seems very pretty fundamental and
Yeah.
basic. What's the roadblock? Why is this not getting? Where is there a citizen roadblock? Is there a government roadblock, or is it a corporate? There's the three pillars, right? Is it the citizen, government, or corporations? Where is the roadblock coming from, and what are the concerns that are not helping us move in this direction in the future?
So I keep saying that the solutions to fixing, cities and making cities more sustainable is not technical, right? Because a lot of those answers are there.
Hmm.
Whether it is the, like the traditional kind of policy answers or the technical solutions to fix this, all of that is there. I think what is lacking is the political ingenuity to fix it. We need a lot more political innovation
Hmm.
uh, to fix this. We need political leadership to take on some of these agendas.
Hmm.
And what I mean, it's not just the government. I'm sure it's the population as well. The citizens, the market. It you know it somehow feels like misaligned agendas, right?
Hmm.
Uh, this is in everybody's benefit to build a healthy, happy city.
Hmm.
Um and the answers are out there. There may be some short term, kind of problems with that to move to that level, but the reason we are not moving, I think, is just because we don't have the political ingenuity to make that
Happen.
happen.
Okay. 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 There's also a statistic on more urbanization, right? They're talking about 70% of people will now live in urban areas by 2040. Firstly, do you really think it's going to happen? Are you going to see such a mass exodus from rural and semi-rural areas into urban centers? And if that does happen, if that's what the future is going to look like, what are some of the issues or concerns that we must think about in terms of planning for the future?
Um, Urbanization is, is almost a physical manifestation of your economy, right? It,
Mm.
in a way, just reflects your economy. So I think it was in late 2010s where the world became humanity became like a macro urban species. Most of us started living in cities around 2007 or 2010, and it's an economic reality. And again, the disruptions that made that happen was also automations. How many farms do you see within the kind of global farming kind of agricultural world, um, where people could make a livelihood out of, right? Like there was so much of automation of these farms, um, and there were not enough jobs for the farming families to kind of continue their livelihood. So you saw that um, movement, migration to cities for newer types of jobs. So in a way, if we had a chat like this maybe in the 1950s, we would be talking about how that's a huge disruption.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it will continue to happen because the future of economy is the knowledge economy, right? We're
Hmm.
actually moving away further and further from the agriculture economy. But even in agriculture and farming, you are actually seeing again rise of new types of economies there with organic farming, because all of us care more about ensuring that we eat food that is more natural, right? after the green revolution that we had in the 80s, where we put so much of pesticides to control to increase the productivity of our food. Now we are all going back to organic. So there's, probably going to be new businesses and workforce that will rise from that. Again, linked to health and climate change in a way, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I think the future is urban.
The future is urban. Okay.
Future is urban. The future, and there's a very hopeful path that we can take where everyone's thriving. We're living in a green economy, where you have access to great education. Cities can be the solution, but if we don't manage it properly, and if we don't use it to our advantage, we could be building a planet of the slums as well, where there's inequity, bad quality air. So this is in our hands, I think, because this is public policy, right? So if you designed and planned, just kind of created policies to build cities that are happy, inclusive, and sustainable, we have a very bright future. But if we let it be without sanitation, without housing, without access to inclusive job markets, then we could be in a very bad, the future could be terrible as well.
What does this mean for an agri economy like India if you're going to see such a mass exodus from the farmlands into cities? What happens to food production in a country like India? At least as of now, we have a net surplus in terms of food production. What changes now?
My understanding is that the productivity in our farms has increased dramatically again due to automation, right?
Okay.
And also just think about the farm family, right? If you were in the 1950s, if you were born in the 1950s, you're 75 years old now, right? And because of the nature of how our family systems work, that person is today probably has 3 generations ahead of him, right? And all of those people are not needed to manage that small farm holding.
Okay.
Right. And also there's so much of automation from, planting the seeds to harvesting. So this was a very intensive manual labor historically, and it's become extremely automated.
Okay.
Right. So you don't need so many, like, that same person. Yeah, like that person who was in 1950, he probably has, I don't know, like every 20 years he has, his son was born
Got it.
20 years later. So imagine the amount of people in that family, right? Like, so they probably are 8 to 15 people.
Okay, understood. Okay, so there's more people now, and then there's enough. They have more hands than they need, and automation is going to tackle that.
And so also, if you look at it from an economic perspective, if your goal as a somebody who thinks about the future of society, if your goal is to enable a good quality of life and higher human development index for all the people in your community, you can only deliver that in a city, right? Let me explain this. So it's impossible for you to have a super specialty hospital in a small village of 20,000 people. You can do that in a city like Bangalore or a smaller city. You can have highly skilled universities in these places because there are so many people to consume them. So in a way,
economies of scale come into these businesses.
Yeah. So you have scale that works for cities, right? So if you want to, these are kind of hubs to deliver on the agenda of increasing human development index, giving access to education, giving access to good quality healthcare. That same thing can't be delivered efficiently at a city scale.
Okay, what you're saying actually is very interesting, but it's contrary to what another person in one of my interviews talked about, a utopia where people would not move to cities and the villages around the world would see schools, public infrastructure, hospitals, etc., so that there is more equitable distribution of the population across large land masses, and there is no need. Like in COVID, we saw, right, they went back home because that is their safe space. And it took a while before they even returned, right? So it
Yeah.
was very obvious that they're here for all the reasons you mentioned. But
I
do
would
you
say
think
that,
that is the future?
even in a small village, you should have the basic infrastructure of healthcare and education. But
Hmm.
if you're going to do a hyper speciality, um, hospital, that requires higher density of
Volume.
people.
Yeah. Okay.
I think another thing is, as an urbanist, if you look at India as a whole,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a need to conserve arable land, bioproductive land.
Hmm.
We should not be doing development all over.
Hmm.
We should do as much to, reduce our kind of development footprint to few, a network of high density places. Because arable land is the currency of the future. We
Hmm.
should be able to grow food, right?
Sure.
The
Hmm.
world has rapidly lost its bioproductive land through development. So I
Hmm.
think we should be strategic. There has to be reasonably high density centers where humans live, and then you have, smaller villages where you're really conserving biodiversity or conserving the
Overall
uh,
ecological footprint.
yeah.
Okay, okay, beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you. I want to touch upon your work. If you could share with us a little bit about your work with Urban Vision, Place Explore, and this equity seems to be one of your big themes. It comes around in the dialogue every now and then. You go back to it. It seems to be sort of the cornerstone of the way you think policymakers should be thinking. So if we could talk a little bit of equity, inclusiveness, and your work, and where do you see this panning out in the future?
So the urban vision is a think do tank on livable and inclusive cities. And this is something that I set up very early in my career. So I was in architecture school. I was also a journalist, which means I was writing for the Times of India. At that point in time, I was able to explore multiple different, policy issues and like civic challenges at that point in time. And then early in my career also, I worked with people who are engaging with the government a lot about public policy. So in a way, like there was no proper career path in a way. Like I was really experimenting with, I don't know, like making films about development to like studying, like doing these reports on future of housing, for example. So it was just that I think I was just following my heart and passion. It was not strategic or like
Sure,
in
sure.
a way thought through. So the urban vision it was a kind of future, thinking about future of cities type of initiative. And some of these matters of equity, whether it's environmental equity and balance, in a way, equity is balance, right? Like a state of equilibrium always comes into being, and it's being a public policy kind of think tank. It's, you're kind of always thinking about how do you ensure public good. So
Mm.
everybody thrives in the society, whether you're a billionaire, millionaire, or a blue collar worker, right? Um, so the last few years, as you know, during the pandemic, when we saw that reverse migration, I did set up like a community-based tourism lab in the village where I was working, where my family had hospitality businesses. And the idea was to create livelihood and jobs for the local women who had actually come back from the bigger cities in these villages. So the Place Explore and the GoodPass now has been part of that agenda. And I think, we are living in a world where there's too much of hope on the magic of the marketplace,
Mm.
right? Where we think that the markets will solve everything.
Mm.
And that in a way has led to what I call the like McDonaldization of the world. Like you could go to any part of the world and you like have Zara, Mango, McDonald's, and Starbucks everywhere. And that's not really, and this is an outcome of that model, right? Mass marketization of the cities. And it's okay, let them be. But what all of us love about cities is the thriving local brands, the made in local movements. You like the local custom, like artisans, right? So um, with the GoodPass and Place Explore, that was the agenda. Like enable more local authentic experiences
Okay.
within the tourism market. So if you come to Goa or Kerala, Karnataka, you have an authentic local experience, right, with food or things to do in those communities. So
Are you seeing this as a trend? Are you seeing other entrepreneurs, governments, etc., trying to bring inclusivity into their models going forward? Do you see this as a trend in terms of a DEI and that whole movement? Or do you think it's still marginalized and there's a few people thinking about it from this lens?
um, no, I think it is still very, very marginalized.
Still very marginalized.
Because the market is, the market forces are so strong that it does produce, the same type of thing everywhere, right? Because of whatever efficiency and scale.
Familiarity.
Yeah. So maybe the answer is not, the answer is essentially local government, which enables some of this, right? So because if you want to be successful as a place in 21st century, you'll have to start investing in local brands, local like food chains, for example. And we're seeing that already in our cities. But I think there's a need for policy support also for that, right? I think in the future, the places that will be successful is the places which have found
A balance.
equilibrium. You can't have, it's not one or the other, right? It is all. I think that we have to create a almost like a space to enable everyone to thrive. Today it's very hard in today's economic climate for anything that is small and micro and local to thrive. But those are what makes a successful place.
And successful. Okay.
Yeah.
Since you talked a little bit about artisans and art, etc., I also want to touch upon that aspect. Where do you see art and culture as an urbanist? What role will these play in societies in the future? And how much as the government and policymakers, how much do they think about art and spaces and museums and galleries? Where is that in the conversation as urban planners and policymakers think about the future?
Um, if for a city to be successful in this century, it should be able to attract the best quality of human capital, right? So if our cities are to be successful in this century, you should be able to attract the best human capital to that city. And what do we want as humans, right? We want access to when you make decisions on where you want to live, you're making those decisions based on, access to culture and arts and leisure, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why you need to invest into arts and culture. It might not seem, in a place where there's so much of other challenges, it almost feels like, oh, art seems very it just seems very elitist. I don't think it is, because if you invested in a place that people want to move to, you've created successful economies there, and that leads to more jobs in that local environment. Was it Winston Churchill who, during the heights of austerity after the war, said that if we, if we don't invest in art, then what are we doing? What will we kind of look forward to or live for, right?
Okay, so you think it's a very key role, and it cuts across these socio-economic barriers.
Yeah. And our country, I mean, we've such a huge tradition of art and artisanship, and I think we have to create incubators and startups for those artisans in our country, right? Not just the tech guys, but all of our artisans to thrive in this kind of economy. Maybe create free market spaces for them. Like in Barcelona, I saw like all of their markets are such beautiful places of local food, art, and culture. They even had a flea market for art. They built like a citadel, like this. It was like a beautiful architectural space for the markets with local producers and makers. There's a place in Vancouver as well, which it's called Granville Market, and it's such a yeah, these are the places that you need in your cities. It had like these workshops of artists and like producers of local cheese and
Okay, so you're saying
local.
that art
Yeah,
has to be at the center of the conversation in cities, cuts
it
across
should be artisans and local makers.
local makers, local
Yeah,
craftsmen.
yeah,
Okay, okay, cool. And I like the analogy of like instead of just having tech incubators or startup incubators, also
yeah.
set up art incubators. A beautiful thought. Okay, let's move towards the last section of this conversation, which is on skilling. So as you think about the future, in workspaces, if you were hiring or if you were to sort of help someone plan their career in urban planning or policy making or architecture, what are some of those critical skills that you think make somebody future ready?
So the education of architecture and urbanism is very interesting to me because it's extremely multidisciplinary. You
Mm.
know, at one point you're talking about design and design aesthetic and art, and at the same time you're reading economic data to kind of look at what the future of that space is. And then you're also doing like structural engineering and like algebra to figure out like buildings, right? So in
Mm.
a way, it makes you very, very multidisciplinary. And I think the future is going to require you to uh, be multidisciplinary, be able to kind of understand various different worlds. So in a way, jack of all and master of some, right? So education that allows you to um, like understand these different worlds and getting skills which are multidisciplinary, I think will be a superpower in the future.
Okay.
Of course, you do need those specialists, like super specialists in a very specific topic. But in general, at the start, it's nice to have skills which are very multidisciplinary from very different worlds.
Okay.
But having said that, I think everyone should pursue their heart and what they really like to do, what makes them come alive,
Okay.
right? Because I mean, this
Or
is a
you're
big
seeing
part of your life, right?
you're seeing a multidisciplinary sort of
Yeah,
perspective as essential. So
yeah,
you start tackling a problem from multiple different lenses.
yeah.
Okay. Are you seeing, Prathima, new careers emerge as the world shifts? And there's so many changes coming in urban areas and policy making, etc. Are you seeing new career categories emerge that didn't exist 5, 7, 10 years ago, even?
Sure, I think green jobs.
Green jobs.
Yeah, huge amount of skilled workers that are being absorbed into green jobs because there are multiple places which are already having stringent policy, around green and environment. So you're suddenly seeing emergence of new roles around green jobs
Across industries.
across industries,
Okay.
supply chains like production, uh, everywhere,
Architects, everywhere. You're seeing it everywhere.
everywhere. Yeah.
Okay. You're seeing it as a fundamental movement, the
Yeah,
green.
yeah, not, yeah. I think I'm seeing the emergence of it, and I think that because we are already seeing a lot of massive disruptions due to climate events,
Hmm.
like flooding, drought, and all of that. So I think my forecast is that in the next decade, as you start seeing these huge disruptions due to climate change, you will have huge policy responses from government,
Hmm.
right? If you start losing like billions of infrastructure suddenly because of climate change events, whether it is, like flooding or, seawater rise or hurricanes,
That's when
you,
they'll.
yeah, so, you do need a drastic policy response, and the response will move towards making, more resilient climate economy. So you will actually see emergence of more green jobs due to that, right? Like
Okay.
it's just because I think the way humanity is that even though they've been speaking about this climate change issue for a long time, nobody really paid attention, really, right?
Until
Maybe some geographies. Now that you are seeing actual climate events, like Chennai was underwater,
sure.
right? Um,
Okay, so
I'm
you're saying it'll
trying.
be a couple of natural disasters, they'll serve as catalysts, and you
Yeah,
will
I think repeated, I don't think one or two will,
okay,
but repeated
repeated-
kind of disasters due to climate change
okay,
will demand a policy response, which will in turn lead to
okay. It'll
uh,
lead to a whole change and
whole
shift.
new kind of shift in industries, which means new jobs.
New jobs. Okay. Last question
And
before
obviously AI, I don't even want to start on that. I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount
whole
of
category of
new
new
jobs.
jobs.
That's a whole, I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but I know I'm already seeing how all of that whole world is shifting, and it is requiring more data analysis and analytics type of roles that will emerge because of that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so two very obvious categories, the AI and then the green jobs. Last question. You just talked about flooding, natural calamities, etc. And then, of course, we also spoke about this utopian world where, if policy making shifts in the right direction, you might actually have a more equitable humanitarian society. Uh, what is your gloom day scenario and what is your boom day scenario? What is your happy, vision of the future saying, hey, if we get it right, this is a world we could actually live in. And if we don't get it right, here's, a gloom day scenario where this is the kind of world we would inhabit. What are your two scenarios?
Or uh, capitalism with a heart,
Okay.
right? Where I love the markets. I think it just brings in so much innovation, ingenuity to our lives. New things are created, and it's just linked to the human, like it's so linked to the human psychology and our kind of humanity in a way, right? So there are lots of things that are positive about the market, but I'd love to see capitalism at the heart. I'd love to see where everyone has access to good quality air,
Mhm.
uh, basic education and healthcare, and leisure, right? Like people have access to great kind of experiences. And I hope, this is a tougher one. I hope that we will thrive in our differences, right? Like all of us have come from different languages, religions. Maybe it'd be nice to be in a world where we celebrate all of that instead of being uh, paranoid about each other, which is happening a lot and lot in the world that they're saying is becoming deglobalized. Not just in the world, but even in our own country, right? Like there's just so much of attention and differences. And I hope like we continue to celebrate them. Like one of my friends once told me that, when I meet Indians, they're so proud of their culinary diversity. They'll always tell me that, when you go to Goa, you should have this prawn curry there. And if you go to Jaipur, then, you should have this dish. And we are so proud of our diversity in terms of our culinary and arts, and we celebrate it without knowing. And I hope we continue to celebrate different traditions and people. And that's my kind of imagination for a nice, future world. And I think that will happen. We may not uh, go towards that very easily. I think we need to be knocked down, few times and before we get there. I guess that will happen, hopefully. The doomsday scenario is already here. Like you're sitting in the Silicon Valley of India with no water. We're in Delhi, where the air quality is so bad that your child is growing up with 50% lower capacity of lungs. There's so much of constant
Mm.
disruptions um, around identity politics, right? Which is really sad to see. Um, we are seeing. I pay attention to two indicators as a policymaker. One is Human Development Index, and
Mm.
another is the Gini coefficient. and both of them are doing very badly in the last decade. I'd like that to move in the right direction, which is that everybody has access to at least a basic quality of good life. And Gini coefficient is the is the efficient, it's a coefficient that measures poverty and inequity in a society. I don't think there's anything wrong with having billionaires and multi-billionaires in a society, but at the same time, you want to see the bottom of the pyramid moving up. And if you don't do that, the future is probably going to be like parts of Brazil where they have to build forts around those rich houses. And that's not a nice society to be in when there's so much of crime and violence. And I was in San Francisco last year after the first time after the pandemic, and I was distressed and totally disturbed to see the state of affairs. And it's not just about inequity, but multiple other reasons related to drugs and other crime. But to see people lying on the streets without food and without access to homes in the Silicon Valley, which is at the heart of the new economy, was super disturbing to see. That should not happen. Where this is the Silicon Valley is where most of the current jobs got created in the world today from. And to see that they can't figure out housing for the homeless, that's obviously not as simplistic as I'm putting it. It's disturbing. So I think the doomsday scenario is available to see in glimpses
already
all over the world.
Okay. So you're saying we already sort of hit rock bottom, and hopefully from here onwards.
It can get worse. It can happen all over the world.
Okay, great. Okay, beautiful vision for the future, Prathima. A more equitable world, more equitable distribution.
More
happier world.
Yeah, more happier, fun, and healthier. Right?
Happier, for everyone. I think that is really the catch point. More equitable distribution of happiness around the world. Beautiful vision of the future, Prathima. Hopefully that's a vision we will live to see in our lifetimes. Thank you so much for this conversation. Beautiful insights. Really, I think you spoke from the heart. And I think for what stood out for me, the entire conversation is that everything you have spoken about, everything you have advocated for comes from a sense of equality, trying to disseminate your knowledge also with other people, trying to make this world just more just and equal in every way. That's really what's shone for me through this conversation. And I really hope that more and more policymakers and urbanists and other children of the future think from this lens of equality and not from a sense of me, myself, and I. Beautiful conversation, beautiful thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.